the second session of the day, where we have the panel discussion for trade. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, Professor, the chair for the session was Professor Sunil Mani, our director. But Professor Mani had to, attend an sudden and important engagement, because of which he had to excuse himself. So, hence, I will be moderating this session. My name is Chidambaran, and I work at the Center for Development Studies. So, first of all, let me welcome everybody to this panel discussion on trade. And to set the context, research on care for this panel discussion, research on Kerala, as we all know, has clearly highlighted the importance of trade in the development of Kerala. So historically, Kerala had and continues to have a highly commercialized. Let's start my video. I'm sorry. Yes. Historically, Kerala had and continues to have a highly commercialized economy that specialized in export-oriented cultivation of commercial crops and processing of their products. For example, in 2019-20, tea, coffee, cashew kernels, seafood, coir products, and spices were the major items that were exported through the Cochin port. Imports, on the other hand, were used to meet a major part of consumption in this state. And this seems to be continuing with fertilizers and raw materials, iron, steel, and machinery and miscellaneous items, including petroleum, oil, and lubricants being the major items of import. So in some sense, trade, we are exporting more of the plantation and commoditized products, whereas we are importing much of the manufactured products. So trade continues to be an important aspect for the state. For even to probably to give further support to trade, the Export Preparedness Index of 2020 released by Niti Aayog, gives some pointers for improvement to Kerala. For example, with respect to the export ecosystem among major states, Kerala is ranked 18, so there is clearly scope for improvement there. But in terms of export policy, it is ranked 10. So probably we have better policy, but we need to have a better ecosystem. However, these two, does not seem to affect the export performance of Kerala, where it's ranked at number 4. So in some sense, though Kerala does not seem to have a very nice export ecosystem and its export policy has scope for improvement, the export performance of Kerala relatively compared to other states is comparatively highly ranked. And so what this tells you is that probably if we improve, the policy improves both the ecosystem and policy itself, there is scope, the export performance of Kerala can go still further. And further, in addition, the GST that has been introduced has given Kerala an opportunity to increase its share in the inter-trade trade within the country. So there is a further opportunity there with respect to the trade sphere. So can Kerala use its existing trade product basket to increase its share, or are there new avenues? This is the broad question, that we would like to think on. And given this context, so and given this question, there are 5 main questions that we have posed. The panelists are free to expand on them or even add further questions. The first question that we are posing for the panel discussion is that despite a not so encouraging export ecosystem, what are the factors that have helped the commercial crop sector deliver a stellar performance? So obviously there is something which the commercial crop sector has really done excellent. So what is that? And how does the manufacturing industry view the ecosystem, and how is it trying to cope with it? So this is the second question that we're trying to place on the table. So the third question that we're trying to place is that has policy been able to promote value addition in exporting sectors? Because as the ranking clearly points out, the Niti Aayog ranking, that with regard to export promotion, it's not been aggressive. So why has it not been aggressive? So that's another question that we are trying to pose. And have exports led to better livelihoods? What has been the experiences of the commercial crop sector and the manufacturing industry? So how much of a whenever we speak of Kerala, we speak more about the tourism and migration stuff, but what has been the contribution of exports to livelihoods in Kerala? And finally, we would also place it on table as to how does one think about increasing the share of Kerala in the interstate trade? So how does one do that? So to to discuss these issues as well as other points which our panelists may have. We have a very distinguished panel. We have Sri Mathew, who is the founder of the Elements and Fair Trade Alliance, which is a visionary group of small-scale farmers in Kerala. Mr. Tomy Mathew is also the chair of the Association of the Indian Fair Trade Producers and also the founder chair of the International Nut Producers Cooperative. So welcome, Mr. Tomy Mathew, for this panel discussion. We are looking forward to hear from you. Also on the panel, we have Sri Sribal Balagopal, who quit IAS in 1983 to promote a pioneering biomedical devices company, Terimo Penpol, that is Peninsula Polymers Limited, which Mr. Balagopal grew and ran till 2012. Currently, Mr. Balagopal also holds the position of the chairman of the Federal Bank Limited. He also serves as a director for the TI MED incubator at the Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute for Medical Sciences and Technology. And he also serves as a member for the governing board of the Center for Management Development at Trivandrum. Welcome, Sri Gopal, and we are eager to hear your views on trade in Kerala. And completing the panel, we have our own Professor K.N. Harilal, who is a professor at the Center for Development Studies. Professor Harilal's interest in trade policy is evident from his PhD dissertation, which was on the India EEC trade, wherein the focus was on trade barriers facing India's exposure to the European community. His focus also has been on the regional economy of Kerala, given the developments in the world trading system at the multilateral regional level. The touchstone of his analysis on trade has always been on the regional economy of Kerala. Professor Harilal also has been a member of the Kerala State Planning Board for 2 terms, and so thus Professor Harilal brings not only the policy but also the academic aspect to this discussion. So welcome, Professor Harilal, to this discussion. So we have around 105 minutes for this session. So I would suggest that each panelist can take around 20 to 25 minutes to place their views, after which the floor can be opened up for discussion. So can I invite Sri Tomy Mathew to kindly present his views? Thank you. Sir, I think you are muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, sir. Thank you.
Apologies for that. Thank you, Dr. Chidambaran, and thank you indeed, the organizers of this conference, for having me in this, what I can't call August pressings now because I'm remotely located. But otherwise, CDAS has been a place that one has always kept in his mind as a flag bearer of, critical analysis of the Kerala model. I don't know if I will actually take up 25 minutes that are allotted to me. I hope there are no penalties for not utilizing the fully allotted time. I might begin by actually throwing a spanner in the works, as it were. We talk of the intro note itself talks of the stellar performance of the commercial crop sector, basically on export earnings. I'm a little surprised by that because maybe yes, if you count by dollar-rupee exchange rate and by volume of exports, maybe we are still there. 2 things surprise me there. One of the crops is cashew, and it's absolutely certain that those export of cashew kernels are not coming from cashews that are grown in the state of Kerala. We import a huge amount of raw cashew nuts and process it. Not necessarily in Kerala, we process it, in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, but Cochin Port and Tuticorin Port definitely accounts for much of those exports. But that's not the point. The basic issue is, it is during a time when the Plantation Labor Act has suffered the most amount of, dilution. It is also during the time when labor unrest, or basically the extremely reduced bargaining power of the working of the plantation labor has come to the fore and has actually captured the popular imagination. It is through this very same time that we find this stellar performance of our, in terms of export earnings of the commercial crop sector. So with that sort of backdrop, I would probably want to take you to the story of Fair Trade Alliance Kerala, which is an organization that I represent. We are about 4,000 farmers located in the Malabar hill tracts of the Western Ghats, Kannur, Kasaragod, Wayanad, and Calicut districts. We were founded actually at the peak of the agrarian crisis in Kerala. You remember those times when phenomena that we thought was restricted to the Hindi heartland or to the cotton belt of the country slowly started rearing its head in Kerala. Prices of commercial cash crops had plummeted, indebtedness had mounted, and farmers began taking to desperate measures. We actually founded Fair Trade Alliance Kerala in the thick of that crisis. It was an attempt by a group of farmers, particularly farmers who were at the forefront of popular agitations that resisted agrarian indebtedness and penury. Organizations like the Farmers Relief Forum, organizations like Karshaga Vedi, organizations like Malanad Karshaga Raksha Samiti. These were all, mass movements of farmers that were non-aligned with established conventional political parties in Kerala. But the question that they were confronted with was one, which is, where is the way out of the TINA factor? If we spoke of agrarian indebtedness, agrarian distress, talked of plummeting prices, the stock answer was the TINA factor. There is no alternative. Which basically meant if you have to compete in the global economy, if you have to commit your prices to the global marketplace, then you have to produce cheap and sell dear. That's the only way to survive. Which was fine in itself. But then we were in the reality of, the Kerala model. Now this to us is intrinsically connected because the produce cheap and sell dear model does not fit with what we popularly understand to be the Kerala model, which is that there's a more even distribution of the economic pie, which in the farmer's case directly meant that the cost of producing these agricultural products could not be reduced without undermining the basic social contract that, written or unwritten, existed in Kerala on account of the unique, socio-economic situation that prevailed, which we have, sort of for wider understanding or recognition called the Kerala model. Therefore, the conclusion was that farmers were among one segment of Kerala population that was called to disproportionately bear the burden of bankrolling the Kerala model. You had higher wages, you had other costs of production that were higher. So you could not reduce those without breaking the social contract, without breaking the foundations of the Kerala model. Agricultural labor had a certain cost in Kerala compared to other places in India, and of course compared to other places in the world. So the TINA factor was basically telling us, and sadly it came from the proponents of the Kerala model itself, from the segments that we thought would uphold this, we had this TINA factor being thrown at us. There is no alternative. Which meant all the social security measures that prevailed in Kerala and offered a sense of security to people were now being seen as debilitating weaknesses of Kerala in the international marketplace. And that meant higher wages, that meant unionized workforce, that meant investments of the state in the social sector like health, education, and the rest. That meant better pay for women. I wouldn't say equal pay, but slightly better pay for women in the workplace. compared to other places. So things that we thought defined the Kerala model were being thrown at us as our debilitating weakness. Now, the attempt of Fair Trade Alliance Kerala was to try and see if these weaknesses could actually be turned into our USPs. Can they be the unique selling propositions with which we peddle our coffee and our cashew and our spices and our cocoa and our coconut products in the international marketplace? Is there a justice-tuned marketplace that would respect these products and be willing to look at the socio-economic conditions under which these were produced, and would say that therefore these conditions being sustained through better prices or through more remunerative prices is actually in the interest of all? This was the attempt that we made. So I have to claim, unabashedly, that I am somebody who actually has been peddling for the last 15 years in the international market price, not just cashew, but Kerala model cashew, not just coffee, but Kerala model coffee. And I'll come to how else I've peddled that a little later. But this was the attempt. The attempt was to see whether there is a justice-tuned social, marketplace. The word fair trade, came into our organization's name not by accident. It was deliberate, but it did not just reflect the fact that fair trade as a labeled system of trading was what we latched onto. What we latched onto was this whole gamut of trade justice, which we understood would be the only way Kerala would be able to actually survive in the international marketplace without diluting, or without dismantling the equity gains of the Kerala model. 15, 17 years later, I think we've had some moderate success with it. And we, probably according to some estimates of my friends in the Cashew Export Promotion Council, Fair Trade Alliance Kerala and Elements are singularly responsible, according to them, for making the industry captains lose about 600 to 700 crores of rupees in the course of the last 15, 16 years, because that's a higher price that cashews fetched in the market because of our market intervention, which meant we could produce, or we could procure cashews at a higher price from our member farmers, and those member farmers being located in strategically within the cashew terrain of Malabar could, also impact upon the market prices. But about this marketplace itself is what I would like to dwell on. If we believe that we need to cut corners to produce, I believe we are actually in a losing battle. In fact, look at the most standard complaint, popular, imagination complaint against Kerala. You look at any workforce there, look at any factory, and there's a red flag. And therefore, that's inimical to efficient production and rolling of goods into the international market. But do not forget, there is a market that says, if there is a red flag, which is then, or any, trade union flag for that matter, which is indicative of trade union rights being robust and prevailing in that workplace, then we would like to, tick one of our boxes of a sustainable product on that count. If there is a market where, or if there is a society where children are by rule in school rather than sweating themselves out in a cashew factory, then we tick another box. If there is equal pay for equal work between men and women in a factory, then we tick a third box. If this community largely invests much more than other places into health, education, and other social security measures, then we tick a further box. This market does exist. It's nascent. No, I wouldn't say it's nascent, but it's small. In a vast ocean of inequitable commerce, in a vast ocean of unfair trade, there is a tiny stream of fair trade into which Kerala can actually commit its boat. And if we fail to do that, we could say we could be great in competing in the international marketplace, but it would be at the cost of dismantling the Kerala model. We anyway have that, the neoliberal narratives pervading our skies anyway talk of the debilitating weaknesses of the Kerala model that is preventing us from, jumping onto this bandwagon of liberalized or neoliberal global commerce. I believe we have a stake in making this trade system committed to, justice grow. We have an immediate, example of that. I would say the farmers' agitation, that unfolded in Delhi was basically India's fair trade movement. The minimum support price that the farmers were demanding, based on a sustainable cost of producing those goods, was basically saying that this economy needs to divide its economic pie more equitably. And that concern is growing in the global marketplace. Therefore, we have concerns about the fire in a Bangladesh factory. Therefore, we have concerns about the sweatshops in China. Therefore, we have concerns about child labor in the chocolate growing, in the cocoa growing countries of Ghana and Ivory Coast. Therefore, we have worries about bonded labor or slave labor conditions in the banana plantations in the Windward Islands. Now, we are uniquely placed, Kerala as an economy is uniquely placed to tout our social sector credentials, to tout the Kerala model itself in the global marketplace and claim that, yes, indeed, these will cost you more, but you have your own stakes, your own justice stakes, pinned to those goods. I'll just dwell upon one more part of this, which is to if trade justice or the lack of it was the first concern that we began this journey with back in 2004-5. By the mid years of this the second decade, the climate crisis was even more acute. There again, you could look at Kerala and then say, we have either our debilitating weaknesses or we have our USP there. And I believe Kerala's unique selling proposition in a climate-challenged marketplace or in a marketplace that is acutely conscious of climate challenge, of the climate crisis, of a planet in peril, is our homestead farming system. Efficiencies of scale and demands of the market, sort of dictated that these veritable treasure troves of biodiversity, these seemingly disorganized, homesteads that had, nutritional requirements, nutraceutical requirements, fodder requirements, and the requirements of sharing in the wider community, all intertwined in a small scale or a smallholder homestead farm, is not amenable to the market. Which is why we chopped off all of that and planted rubber or planted cocoa or planted the last cash crop that we thought would give us that fancy price and therefore would redeem us. Today, in a climate challenged world, a multi-crop biodiverse farm and the products that are committed from that is definitely a unique selling proposition. Of course, we need to be smart. Of course, we need to see how the new advances in information systems and digital technologies help us aggregate small produce, how we overcome the issues of economies of scale not hammering, or not hampering the aggregation of these commodities. But the homestead farming, or the bedrock of what people maybe simplistically call, where does Malayali's Tandedam come from? And Dr. M. Gangadharan of hallowed memory, who passed away recently, said it probably comes from Tandeidam, which is partly the Puredam that Malayali holds. So this homestead farming system and this homestead farming economy is or can be pitched as a USP in the international marketplace. These are the two ideas I commit. I commit that the Kerala model is clearly a USP, and we have demonstrated that. I wouldn't say we still are in a fair trade market. I would only say that we are dealing with a fairer, compared to a very unfair market, we are dealing with a little more fair market. But instead of making these icebergs of relative prosperity, or the project approach that is currently becoming very fashionable in Kerala, we have a unique opportunity of saying we have a Kerala model of production, which is not project-based, but which is an economy level offering to the international market. Therefore, it's not a Fair Trade Alliance Kerala of 4,500 farmers that are committing its products on fair trade terms to the international market. It is Kerala as an agrarian economy with its homestead farming traditions that will commit these products to the international market. I believe that market is growing. I believe solidarity trade definitely is growing. I believe concerns of environment, concerns of future generations, and concerns that my chocolate, my coffee that I drink is not blood coffee, blood chocolate, but does have a fair deal for the primary producers of these goods, will only increase its stakes in the marketplace. And Kerala, I hope, will not miss the bus there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tomy, for an excellent rendering of the fair trade movement. It's really, I'm sure we will have lots of points to discuss on that, on the way you have carried out the Kerala model of production and how you are able to break the commoditization and bring a niche for yourself. So we will just hold on to those questions. May I invite our next speaker, Sribal Gopal, to kindly take the stage and present his views.
Thank you, Professor Iyer. Can I have the slides up, please? My presentation.
Yes. 1 second, sir.
So, thank you. So while I, at the outset, let me thank the organizers, Professor Devika and Professor Sunil Mani, for inviting me again to the 3rd edition of this very important conference, which I hope will become a regular feature. I'm very impressed at the content so far in this edition. And I'm very happy to follow on an outstanding talk by Tomy Mathew on his Fair Trade Alliance and their outlook on business and how they plan to promote the interests of their member farmers. I admire the unapologetic espousing of all those positive features of this state, which unfortunately most of the time our business people spend apologizing about. They are very defensive about the fact that there is the minimum wages here in Kerala are the highest in the country, that the labor movement is strong and vibrant with good trade unions. And all these are, you can sense in the defensiveness of much of the discourse, not only by the business community, but also by, I'm sorry to say, the government also. When they go out, they are very defensive, bending over backwards, trying to reassure people that, in spite of all this, don't worry, you will be okay if you come to Kerala. So we start off itself on the wrong foot. And here I must just say before I'll very quickly go into my presentation, but Tomy Mathew's talk inspired me to just share a small anecdote with you. When I was running my company, and we were a small company then, we must have been doing about 100 crores turnover, and it's a high-tech manufacturing, medical devices based on technology developed at Chitra Tirunal Institute. And we were competing with the world's best. We were the only makers of the product in India. And I went on a visit to a supplier's factory in a place called Silvassa, just to the north of Bombay. This factory was run by a multinational corporation, and they were supplying some important items to us. So for our large suppliers, as managing director, I used to go and visit them once a year. So I was going there for the first time, and they showed me around their factory, very impressive place. And at the end of the thing, we were having a presentation, and the head of manufacturing said something. So he mentioned something about the cost to company as some very low figure per that is the daily wage of the workers, and the fact that they work for 10 hours, or if I remember right, 10 hours a day. So I heard it out, and then so they were telling me about the quality and the standards and everything. I said, just a minute. During the presentation, your head of manufacturing said that you pay your people, this is the daily wage which is paid. So they said, yes. So I said, that's below the statutory minimum wage. How can you pay that? So they didn't know what to say. They looked at me as though to say, what, that is, they didn't expect me to find that a problem. So I said, I'm sorry, I find that a problem because we want to deal with companies which abide by the laws of the land. And if you are violating a very basic rule about the wages which you have to give your workers, we don't want to deal with you. Now, I don't think they had ever got such an answer from a small manufacturer coming to such a large company and telling them, we don't want to deal with you because you're not paying your workers the full dues. And I said, you're also making them work 10 hours. How can you make them work 10 hours? The Payment of Wages Act and the Factories and Labor, the acts and rules are very clear about how many hours you can make a person work. So then they really had to do a lot of backtracking and explanation and this and that. And I think we reviewed our contracts with them and we shifted our business to somebody else. So anyway, what I just wanted to say was, I fully agree with Tomy that the path towards competitiveness and all is not a race to the bottom. It is, we have to imaginatively leverage our strengths, and what we consider weaknesses, in my opinion, can actually become great strengths even in a global marketplace which is changing. Now, let me very quickly get into this. I am sorry I took a few minutes on this. Can I have the next slide, please? So, in the initial decades in Kerala, there was a period of slow growth of the manufacturing sector because the manufacturing sector in Kerala was mainly dominated by resource-based industries, which were mostly low-tech, low-value addition, mostly coir, cashew, and some handlooms, etc. And wages were growing at that time due to labor militancy. And then and plus there was the fact that in the late 70s started a significant migration of workers out of the state, to other parts of the country, and then later to the Middle East for work. And there was a persuasive argument put up about the Dutch disease hypothesis about the such a inward remittances, for instance, being like a resource curse and having an adverse impact on the tradable sector. However, I would like to point out that the growth of the tradable sector in manufacturing unexpectedly starts to pick up in the 1990s, at a time when remittances were growing strongest. In fact, during the 1990s and in the early 2000s, the remittances reached the peak in terms of as a proportion of gross state domestic product. But during this time, a modern manufacturing sector started. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, some of these companies are, I've listed them out because I have to get into specifics and into some micro level stories here, because unfortunately there is no aggregate data available. I've tried to find out this modern manufacturing sectors. Can I get some cross-sectional data here? I've not been able to find. So these are companies I know personally, and so I can vouch for the fact that all these companies exist, that they're doing very well. Thermo Penpal Private Limited was a company which I started and grew and sold to a Japanese company. Agape Diagnostics are India's largest maker of in vitro diagnostic test kits. Dentcare is Asia's largest maker of dental implants. Caron Healthcare make personal protection equipment long before the pandemic came. TTK Healthcare make heart valves based on Chitra Tirunal Institute technology. HLL Lifecare's blood bag division makes the same product which I make, and there are many more. So the first category is of medical device companies. Second is high value added spice processing companies like Synthite Limited, Plant Lipids Limited, AK Flavors Limited, AVT McCormick, AVT Naturals, and there are many more. These are all high value added. They do solvent extraction, they do column chromatographic extraction, they extract oleoresins, flavors. They are not just cleaning and repacking spices. These are very highly value added businesses. PK Steel Castings Limited, rated by Forbes as the most efficient steel casting company, not only in India, one of the eight most efficient steel casting makers in the world, is located in Kozhikode. They employ more than about 1,500 people. Active Char Limited, a highly profitable activated carbon plant, which is located somewhere near Cochin. SFO Technologies, one of India's largest electronics hardware exporters of high value products like ultrasound imaging equipment, etc. This is located at Kakinada. Then you have rubber. Now in rubber products, earlier on you had chappals. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with chappals and sandals and all that. You need even those products because they are used by millions of people. But here are highly value added products. Vajra Rubber Products is a company which makes products which are used on stealth submarines and stealth warships for the Navy. It's a surface coating to absorb ultrasonic impulses, etc. Asthma Rubber Products, who make latex rubber gloves. Lenora Gloves Private Limited, which makes latex products, and a few others. So these are just a sampling of some names of modern manufacturing companies which have come up in the last 2 to 3 decades. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, the growth of these MSMEs contradicts the narrative of that there will be a decline in the tradable sector because of the fact that wage costs are going to go up and the non-tradable sector is getting more attractive. So there will be manufacturing will not become a thing. I think this seems to be contradicted by that, because these are not just one-off companies. Quite a large number have already come and established themselves, and the number is growing. So despite higher wages, militant labor, and the absence of a strong manufacturing base in the state, these MSMEs started small and have grown steadily. Then there was no evidence which I could find of any proximate cause in the form of any helpful government policies or incentives like some investment subsidies and this and I don't think any of those things had anything to do with any of these MSMEs coming up. And I also find that most of them are not located on the industrial estates or industrial development areas. They are located in their own land, etc. These MSMEs were, interestingly, all started by local entrepreneurs with little industry experience in their families. They are first generation entrepreneurs, most of them, some from agrarian backgrounds, some who were working in industry elsewhere and came back, and etc. Then they all started small and grew organically. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, around that time, some public policy initiatives had been taken to promote industry. One of the most prominent ones was Keltron, which started off very promisingly with establishing a manufacturing base in various locations across the state. But after the initial competent professional team of managers left for various reasons, Keltron appeared to flounder. And there was also reports of excessive political interference. Several other state-owned public sector undertakings appear to have suffered the same fate and not done quite well. Private investment during the first 2-3 decades came into Kerala along with exorbitant demands for and conditions for raw materials at very low prices or power at very highly discounted rates. And I have some examples of those companies are Mavu Rayons, Punur Paper Mills, Binani Zinc, TCC and others, which were all EHT consumers, or some which were based on local availability of raw materials like Travancore Cements. Now, many of these, almost all these companies have shut or have vanished because once these concessions and incentives were removed for one reason or the other, they all vanished. The central PSUs, which have started in the state, very few because of Kerala being unfortunately a contrarian state as far as the government of India is concerned, naturally has received rather stepmotherly treatment as far as the PSU investments, central PSU investments are concerned. But those that did start here have all done well. And in fact, even where like Hindustan Newsprint Limited, where it was shut down, this unit, the Kerala unit of Hindustan Newsprint Limited was considered to be the most efficient, most productive and most profitable of the 4 units of Hindustan Newsprint Limited. And the same goes for Hindustan Organic Chemicals. The Bombay unit was running at a loss, whereas the Cochin unit was running at a profit. Cochin shipyard is the most profitable shipyard among all the shipyards in the country. ITI Kanjikode was running at a profit when the parent ITI was running at a loss. Instrumentation Limited here was running well, whereas the parent unit at Kota was running at a loss. So there are many examples. And HLL, of course, has been a stellar performer. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, I was thinking, what were the factors that enabled these manufacturing MSMEs to grow? Because remittances continued, inward remittances continued to grow through the 90s and in fact peaked as a share of GSDP probably in the first decade of the 2000s. There was no discernible industrial promotion policy, which I am aware of, which could be a proximate cause. So I think there are probably some other reasons. We have to look elsewhere and some of them, they may not be, in very proximate causes, but I think they hold out hints for us as to where we should look for industrial policy initiatives in future. Can I have the next slide, please? One of the thing is, of course, local supporting factors for any high-tech manufacture and export. You need good transport connectivity through road and rail to ports, airports, markets. Second is availability of power and water. Third is availability of skilled people. Fourth is urban amenities. Kerala has a very distributed urban development pattern, so that you have 7 cities with population of more than 1 million, and you have dozens more of tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 level towns and cities. And finally, you have a network of good R&D institutions and test labs across the state. I'll come to that a little bit more. Next slide, please. So the state in the 70s went in for a far-sighted policy of setting up a high-tech manufacturing ecosystem. That comprised, first was setting up Keltron. So in a state which had no electronics industrial base, starting from ground up was set up Keltron with a whole gamut of capabilities were set up. A lot of skilled people, mostly who are from Kerala, but not necessarily from Kerala, came to Kerala. They were brought together under, and this was the first state public sector undertaking in the electronics sector. It was a pioneer. And they set up a chain of manufacturing centers across the state. Around the same time, in the same decade, a network of advanced research institutes and labs was set up by the state government, including Chitra Tirunal Institute, Center for Earth Science Studies, Center for Water Resources Development and Management, Forest Research Institute, Pichi, ERNDC, then the Rajiv Gandhi Center, etc., with highly qualified scientific personnel. In the 60s, in the late 60s, and then mostly in the 70s was the full development. The Vikram Sarabhai Space Center facilities around Trivandrum also came up, which provided a pool of highly qualified technical and scientific personnel in advanced areas of technology. Can I have the next slide, please? So This helped in the creation of a pool of technical resources within the state, highly qualified and very specialized technical resources. VSSC and other R&D institutes and lab provided work for ancillaries and MSMEs of various kinds, which grew up around them. This multiplied the need for technically skilled people within the state. Qualified and skilled people from Kerala returned to their state from jobs in distant places, since good jobs in their specialty were now available locally. Can I have the next slide, please? So some of the common features of these success stories are, many of them, and this is again related back to the subject of trade here, because many of these, the materials and components used by these modern manufacturing facilities were sourced from other parts of India or overseas, and their products were shipped to other parts of India or overseas. So they were only manufacturing facilities. There was no other, sort of resource-based locational advantage for these MSMEs to come up here. So what was the reason? So in other words, their location does not seem to have been determined by supply chain considerations. But on the other hand, availability of skilled scientific and technical manpower at reasonable cost seems to have been one of the major considerations. I can vouch for it that was the major consideration behind my locational decision to locate my unit at in a panchayat just outside Trivandrum. And when I set it up there, it was a small unit of 50 people. Today, that factory employs 1,400 people, and the products are shipped to 58 countries across the globe. It is rated as the largest manufacturing facility in the world, single location manufacturing facility in the world for manufacturing high technology blood transfusion products. Then good transport connectivity is obviously another factor. See, we think we are at one end of India. Yes, we are at one end of India, but we have 3 international airports. We have now, I think, 4. So we have one very good international port with good connectivity. We have one of the underrated transportation facilities which we utilized very well was, despite being so far from upper India markets, I could send my products by rail and they reached place like Patna in 48 hours without undergoing the gamut of any of the interstate checkposts or anything, because I sent it by railway parcel. In fact, the sight of my product carton stacked up on the railway station platform of Trivandrum Central Railway Station used to make many friends call me from the railway station saying, Bala, we saw your product stacked up on the platform there. So we used all that. So the thing was, we never found any disadvantage. We found that it was extremely well connected from a transportation perspective. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, here there are some things which perplex me. For instance, at the last edition, Sushil Khanna and I, we worked together on a paper. Sushil had done a lot of work with another collaborator on using GST data, freshly minted GST data for 2 years to try to establish interstate trade flows. And when he was looking into that, those seemed to indicate that very little high technology or modern technology manufacturing was happening in India. Now, I told him this list of 50 companies I reeled off. And I said, all of them are manufacturing here and all of them are shipping their products outside the state. How come it's not being captured? Then we found that there were some definitional issues. For example, that high technology was defined more by product and sector rather than by process. So if you are in spices processing, even if you're using ultra modern column chromatographic methods of of extracting flavors or essences, it was treated as traditional sector because it was that some sort of older classification. So there were. So that does not fit the facts which I mentioned. So the problem could lie in the way high tech is defined. And the other point is also that all these companies which I'm mentioning pay high salaries. They're best in class in terms of working conditions and all the other employment terms and their cafeterias and all. That's the way actually industrial enterprises should be run. If you see most of these. Can I have the next slide, please? So the future directions for research. So one of my requests here is also that we need a lot more research, lot more data, lot more study of data needs to be done to capture what exactly is happening in business and industry. The structural transformation of manufacturing sector in Kerala has been actually proceeding apace, at least judging from the data which I've seen. And these are factories which some of them employ hundreds, a few of them employ even thousands of people, not in one factory, in several factories. So they employ people in hundreds and some in thousands. Their turnover is in hundreds of crores and a few of them in a couple of thousand crores. So I'm just mentioning, just if you take, for example, if I list another 50 companies like the ones, if another 50 companies like the ones I've described come up in Kerala, they will indirectly and directly generate another 100,000 jobs and create and raise the contribution of industry to GSDP, which today is slowly creeping up. I think it's around 13% of GSDP now, after having dropped to a low of around 7% in the 1990s. So these don't require much land. They don't require expensive techno parks and all that. Though if you provide proper industrial parks, they will definitely be an incentive. The economic multiplier of such investment and production will also be, in my opinion, much greater than an IT company, where, I'm not knocking IT, but what I'm trying to say is the industrial multiplier and the economic multiplier of a manufacturing enterprise, which comes up, and the number of services which it will require are huge. I think this is my last slide. Can I? Yeah. So I'll just wrap up here by just saying a couple of points. And I want to just circle back to, where I started. The point here is not to dilute, all these are companies which are manufacturing, which are competitive in Kerala, in this state where the narrative, unfortunately, is all about Attimari, Nokukuli, and hartals, and that's the kind of picture. But my experience it's not that I think that these are good practices. The point is, these practices never bothered me for 25 years of running a small startup and building it to global scale. And that, I think, has been the experience of most of the companies which I've mentioned here also. So what we need to find is, what were those factors which enabled these high-tech manufacturing companies to come up, prosper, and thrive? And some of those things are that the actions like investing in high technology laboratories, investing in higher testing laboratories, creating jobs and an environment for highly qualified technical people to come back to Kerala and work. All this has provided the kind of ecosystem which modern technology-based manufacturing requires. They don't need SOPs like some employment-related incentives and some investment allowances and things like that. I think we are barking up the wrong tree if we look at that. So some of the things were done correctly. Now what we should do, and unfortunately still too much of government industrial policy experience seems to be directed to holding road shows in Bombay and Delhi and Calcutta and Dubai and Singapore and places like that. In my experience, the last 25 years, not one investor has come from any of those places. All those road shows were a waste of time. So I'm not saying that, these big malls, Lulu Mall, Lulu Yusuf Ali is definitely a guy who has brought a lot of investment into Kerala, and he should be respected for that, etc. But my point is, he's for one, and he's come back to Kerala because he's from this state also. That's my argument. I don't think some Walmart is going to come here and set up a factory here. So the point here is, I think if we just look at what do the MSMEs which start here, what do they need to grow? What do they need to grow more? How to encourage more of them? Some of the right things are being done. The Kerala Startup Mission and the track record of startups which I have been tracking for the last 4 or 5 years has been really good work, has been done. Easily the best startup ecosystem, one of the best startup ecosystems in the country is today working in Kerala. And I think that's a very good augury. So what government should do and what public policy should do is learn from the mistakes of the past and learn from what worked in the past. And what worked in the past were like Keltron. That's what worked in the past, because many of the successful units which I mentioned here, they're all run by ex-Keltron people, And similarly, Chitra Tirunal Institute was set up. The Chitra Tirunal Institute has spawned at least 6 of the companies which I have mentioned in that list are directly spawned by Chitra Tirunal Institute. So that is the organic kind of way we have to look at it, and not the old way of the throwing some crumbs like investment subsidies and some incentives and thinking investors are going to come. So with that, I will stop. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. I must have provoked a lot of thoughts, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Balagopal. It was really a very exhilarating and very invigorating talk. Thank you for that. And the message that comes from the practitioners, if I can say so, Mr. Sri Tomy, Mathew, and Sri Balagopal, is that the export performance is obviously, the state is augmenting human capital, which the human capital, especially the entrepreneur vision or energy of such people, that picks up an opportunity and takes the cost of the Kerala model as given, and then comes up with a value proposition as to how Kerala can be used for manufacturing, or how agriculture produce in Kerala can be sold or traded across the world. So this is the broad message that's coming from the practitioners. So now to understand and hear the academicians and the policy person's view, I invite Professor Harilal to kindly present his views. Thank you. I think you're muted, sir. I think you're muted.
Thank you, Chidambaran, Tomy, Mathew, and Balagopal. I am, in fact, feeling very thrilled by these two presentations. I was not feeling very motivated to give this presentation, but after listening to Tomy, Mathew, and Sri Balagopal, I feel much more energetic to speak. In fact, Tomy, Mathew indirectly and Sri Balagopal very directly referred to the Lexi's hypothesis on Kerala's development. I was a co-author of that initial study. We were addressing this question of remittances migration boom. Remittances migration boom, in fact, contributed substantially to consumption in Kerala. It contributed to income of people and total state income also. That's all well documented, and in the morning session, we discussed those things. Now, in spite of such inflow of remittances and people going to international labor markets, our goods producing sectors were not doing well. So that was the paradox which we were trying to address. And this West disease syndrome, that paradigm, came very handy because it speaks about two effects, resource movement effect and spending effect, which affect wages in the context of Kerala and the prices of non-tradables. And prices of non-tradables in Kerala are really high compared to our competitors. So it is affecting competitiveness of tradable sector in Kerala. In fact, the plantation sector, the agriculture sector in general, and manufacturers, because wages are high, rent is high, and you may name any non-tradable which cannot be brought in from other states or other countries. The cost is high in Kerala. So it affected our competitiveness, and our goods producing sector suffered. And it is against this conclusion was against the common notion that Gulf boom had benefited all of us, all sectors. We concluded that it really helped consumption in general, services sector in a big way, but it adversely affected tradables, goods producing sectors, agriculture, which agriculture and manufacturers is try to sell in the pan-Indian market or external market. Now, in that study, we also mentioned very clearly that our strategy should be to develop products which are immune to West disease impact. See, given such remittances and given such outflow of labor cost is likely to be high here. Of course, militancy is also there. And land prices, rent, non-tradable prices will be high in Kerala. It will continue to be so. Now, we should go for a specialization which is immune to the high cost of labor, high cost of non-tradables. And we have given some examples where we are not competing in the international market or rest of India market in terms of low wages. We are also not competing by damaging our environment. We have certain kind of restrictions here as far as environment is concerned, as far as labor legislations are concerned. In spite of that, can we compete? Which are the areas where we can compete and how to manage the market that way? In fact, no, these two presentations. First, Tomy Mathew explained how in a highly competitive agricultural market, there is a way to get out of this competition to reduce wages, competition to maximize environmental externalities. So fair trade is one very important way of handling this. Then cooperative movement, etc., can also address this question. And there are some success stories in Kerala which can be highlighted from agriculture. And from industry, there are a large number of industries which have shown this. And the pioneering person, of course, is Mr. Balagopal. And I have personally benefited from my interaction with him as an industry captain. You know, he had some of these industries were not known to me, which he mentioned. Later, I found out about those firms doing well. So, Dexterous environment is there. It is going to be there for long. Wages are likely to be high in Kerala. Land prices are likely to be high in Kerala. There is a way out. If you specialize in areas where competition is not in terms of wages, but competition is in terms of high skill, competition is in terms of knowledge content, technology content, etc. That's where we should be changing our specialization. Now, this question takes us to the larger issue of Kerala specialization. Where are we specializing really? This question of specialization in pan-India division of labor and global division of labor is very critical for Kerala, unlike other regions, because we are a highly globalized region, highly integrated region, and that has a long history. I am not going into that because we have limited time. And yesterday, Professor John Kurian gave us a taste of that. He has traced the history of Kerala's integration with the rest of the world, the old trade channels and all. Now, for centuries, we were having such trade relations with the rest of the world, but during colonialization, during the colonial period, it got intensified. In the sense, trade started influencing domestic production structures in a big way. Our cropping pattern, crop husbandry, industry, industrial relations, land relations, they were influenced in a big way by trade. Earlier, trade influenced politics, but production relations and production structures were not that much influenced. Colonial period made a major change. Now, over a period of time, we got more and more integrated into the global division of labor. Now, after independence, our integration with the rest of India also got further intensified. To the extent we can very carefully, without exaggeration, we can tell that Kerala, this region, produces whatever it produces, it exports. Most of what we produce is for the external market. And whatever we consume, most of it is imported from rest of India or other countries. It's a very intense case of specialization, participation, integration with the rest of the world. And that's why we should be bothering about the areas of our specialization. What's our specialization? Is it advantageous? Is it in sunset areas where we are caught in adverse specialization? The Dutch argument was sharply trying to highlight this adverse specialization of Kerala. But how are we going to change this specialization, pattern of specialization? Do we have policy tools to do that? Quite often, in many of our discussions, we tend to assume that we are in a closed economy and the regional government is having all the powers to influence all these trade flows and markets. You know, we are in a kind of fool's paradise if you assume that. It's very difficult. In fact, no, the regional government and the people of Kerala are not having powers to influence our pattern of specialization. We don't have tariffs and quantitative barriers with us. Even India government is not having those policy measures now because of WTO and other agreements. They cannot have border restrictions. Now coming to internal barriers also, we have forfeited all those. And after the introduction of GST, we have a common internal tax. So we don't have a mechanism available with the regional people, the society of Kerala, to discriminate in favor of many of these activities. You will have to take International Division of Labour or Pan-Indian Division of Labour as given. And there is hardly any policy mechanism left to seriously influence the pattern of specialization and the rules that govern the terms of exchange. And such rights were taken away because of various kinds of trade agreements, WTO process, and then India-ASEAN agreement, India-Sri Lanka agreement, and a lot of other agreements which came in between. In fact, no, these are topics where we need to really discuss, taking a lot of time. It's not fair for me to take so much time, but let me mention India-ASEAN trade, the agreement. See, in the India-ASEAN free trade agreement, ASEAN countries and India agreed to remove trade barriers on mutual trade. And that was a phased process, and most of these trade barriers were removed in the process. So we have almost a common market built between ASEAN countries and India. Now, why should we bother about this? Let competition come. In fact, now this was the kind of questions that we heard everywhere, including in CDS. Why should we bother about free trade? Now, take the case of plantations. Take the case of commodities. See, we have the same cropping pattern as many of these ASEAN countries. Their geographical features are very similar. We compete in the same area. Now, what is happening? I can very clearly tell, because of these free trade agreements, the producers in these countries, farmers in these countries, are competing intensely among themselves for each other's market. Earlier, we used to compete in the international market, for London market, for market in Russia. But now for India, in Kerala market, rubber growers in Kerala are competing with rubber growers in ASEAN countries. And these things, this competition drive down prices. And producers are atomized. They don't have any mechanism to aggregate their market power. But you take any value chain, north end of the value chain, you have monopolies, you have big houses, and they have market power because the number is very limited. Producers are very limited in number. Whereas when it comes to the southern end of the value chain, you have large number of producers. That's where I will agree. I will disagree with John Kurian as observation that no, if you can control the supply price of fish or supply price of rubber, everything will be okay. Now, how are they going to control the supply price? It's very difficult because no, there are no mechanism to aggregate market power. One possibility slowly coming up is through cooperatives and all. Some earlier experiments were there, but cooperatives and such efforts were promoted by the state. But now state is not having even that power to help the cooperatives. And fair trade, of course, no, that's a way out, and that should be encouraged. And if that can be augmented beyond a point, it will be very helpful. But here, I'll not make a point that why are we not having fair trade agreements in WTO? Why are we not having fair trade agreement in ASEAN, in India-Sri Lanka trade? That's where the farmers will have to, peasants will have to come together. When multilateral agreements are negotiated, India-ASEAN agreement is negotiated, we always bother about big capital, the value chain managers. We don't bother about farmers. Why don't we ask government of India? Why don't we, the producers from Indonesia and Thailand, ask their respective government, let us have a sub-agreement in the India-ASEAN agreement where we value fair trade, where we value the rights of workers, where we value the rights of environment. Such agreements are not coming. That's where all these trade agreements are very important in deciding the pattern of specialization, which is particularly disadvantageous to developing countries, farmers, workers, and all. And the way out, of course, the way out, one is to try at the level of individual producers to go in for products where there is scope. There is a small market for fair trade products in many European countries, which is growing, which is promising. We should try to make use of that. Similarly, we should get into high technology, new science areas where we have certain capabilities. We should try to make use of it. And whatever limited powers local people are having, local governments are having, they should try to promote such activities. Now, Chidambaran, can I take how much time? How much more time is left for me?
So you can take 5 to 7 minutes more, sir.
Okay. Now, since we are discussing this question of trade of Kerala, the latest development should also be mentioned. That's why I thought I'll mention about India's free trade agreement with UAE, which is coming up. Negotiations are going on, and the final signing and will be done very soon, and details will be made available soon. This agreement will have to be studied in detail. But as a person who had studied trade agreements, the earlier trade agreements, I have a hunch. See, it is unlikely to be very hostile in terms of its impact on Kerala. India-ASEAN agreement, unfortunately, whatever we predicted in CDS study had come true as far as rubber and other products are concerned. For the last 20 years, the India-ASEAN agreement completely changed the rubber economy, the plantation economy of India. And not only India, in fact, farmers in many ASEAN countries, they are also in the same boat because we are engaged in cutthroat competition. We are competing each other in each other's market. Now, the West Asia Free Trade Agreement has certain other aspects because now the cropping pattern and geographical features are very different. And they are not likely to offer competition in many areas of our specialization. And at the same time, it's a very big market. And one of our studies in CDS earlier highlighted preference similarity of India and UAE markets. One of my students had done a work on this. Because now UAE is having a large South Asian population, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Sri Lankans and all. And their preference pattern is very similar to ours. So they prefer a lot of Indian products, a lot of South Asian products. So that is creating a lot of trade. Now in the free trade agreement probably will remove all the restrictions on trade. So that will be an opportunity for Indian manufacturers, Indian producers, and Indian SMEs, and even for fair trade alliance. And of course, now there are people in West Asia also who will be preferring healthy products which respect labor rights and all. At least, even though they may not be respecting labor rights in their places, they will value our labor rights. So India-UAE free trade agreement needs to be studied because it opens up possibilities. Its impact is likely to be slightly different from the impact of the India-ASEAN or India-Sri Lanka free trade agreement. Now, one very important message that we should be taking from this conference is this: we should request all these nation states. The agenda of all international trade negotiations are in favor of capital, and there is a possibility of changing the agenda. Try for a new agreement. There are many constituent agreements of this. These major trade agreements. WTO itself, we can have a separate agreement where these kind of issues are taken and countries are brought together to respect these things. Now, I'll conclude by saying this. It's very important to participate in the International Division of Labor, in Pan-Indian Division of Labor. There is no way of running away from participation in global division of labor. We will have to participate in trade. But it's very important to decide where we specialize. And it's also very important to bother about the terms of specialization, the rules of specialization. Unfortunately, we don't do that. I should not be hesitating in making the statement. We should be listening to industry leaders like Sribal Gopal. I'm very hesitant to speak in front of him about this, but CDS has learned. He has been visiting CDS for a long, and when I was in government, I had opportunities to consult him. He got very good advice, and some of them I know we have not been able to really take up. If we had taken up, we would have benefited. With that, let me conclude. I think I've saved 2-3 minutes for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Harilal, for your rounded view on policy as well as academics. So now both the practitioners, the policy and the academic view seems to be coming in favor of specialization, as well as if both in the agricultural front as well as the manufacturing front for greater trade. And also, as Professor Harilal also pointed out, specialization in what is something that policy needs to think through, and that is indeed food for thought. So now I'll let the floor open for questions or comments. So we can take, the participants have either the option of raising their hands and posing their question verbally, or they can even put their questions in the chat box. So we can take groups of three questions each, so that everybody has more time to speak. So I think we already have one comment in the chat box by Professor Korean. Professor Korean, would you like to speak that out? Professor John Korean? Professor Korean is not probably. Let's Professor Mani. Do you have?
Thank you very much for the nice presentations. I'm sorry that I had to rush for some other meeting when Mr. Balagopal was speaking, but I could listen to the initial part of his presentation, the whole of Tomy Mathew's nice presentation, and the whole of Harilal's presentation. See, one thing which I wanted to raise was some of it has been answered by Harilal. Is that, you see, whenever we talk about trade of Kerala, we always are talking about international cross-border trade. But that, according to the data, is very small. It's only about 1 or 2% of our GSDP. Okay, it's not a very important thing as far as Kerala is concerned. But interstate trade, that is Kerala's trade with the rest of India, is very, very high. And in fact, according to the GST data which was available and compiled by Professor Sushil Khanna recently, this, for the first time, we have some very clear data on interstate trade, and that works out to almost like 24% of our GSDP. Now, just to give you an idea about how big this 24% is, remittances that we always talk about is only about 12% of Kerala's GSDP. You know, if you use the remittance by the estimated by the Kerala Migration Survey, which CDS was doing, it's only about, I'm referring to the period about 2019-20, okay, not the very recent data, because interstate trade is extremely important, and there we have a trade deficit with the rest of India, which is understandable, and much of this trade is actually in construction material, because you have a fair amount of construction activity which is going on, and that you know, is the most important item in terms of value. So what are the possibilities of making some of these things here, make it in Kerala, like make in India, make in Kerala, you know, some of these items, because I think this is the only way in which we can make the economy much more dynamic, because we know that many of the agriculture products, we do have difficulties. And as Harilal has put it, you know, and also Tomy Mathew also referred to the thing, for most of the commodities, we are not doing well at all. And it's not important from the GSTP point of view. Sorry to be speaking in that way, but so interstate trade is the most important. And there, of course, it is possible for you to practice fair trade, for instance, as you know, the initial nice example which Balagopal was mentioning. He was actually importing some things from that firm in near Mumbai, and he was raising questions which were relevant to this. But can we really practice fair trade when we are essentially talking about interstate trade? Because we should be talking, when we are talking about trade in Kerala, we should be talking more about interstate trade rather than cross-border trade. This could be answered by any of the three, you know, because I think it touches all the three panelists.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Mani. So we'll take a couple of questions more. Professor Korean, you had a comment. Would you like to say that? Or shall I read? Because I think the comment is he's put in the chat box, but it's I think not complete. So Professor Korean. Okay. I think till the time that the others have raised their questions. I have a couple of questions. One is with to Sri Tomy Mathew. See, you mentioned about incorporating the the Kerala model of production in your in the agricultural products. So how did you really go about? Was it like certification? Was it GI tags? Or what, did you go and select for, say, niche markets which appreciated the ideals for which the Kerala model stood for? And one probable challenge in that kind of a thing is the institutional continuity, in the sense that both the buyer and seller need to have some kind of continuity to carry on with the same kind of principles. So how do you plan to take that into consideration over a longer period of time? So that's one probably question that which I had as to how important do you think is institutional continuity in this kind of kind of a framework. So that's one question which I had for Sri Tomy Mathew, and also to Sri Balagopal. What I wanted to ask is what do you think about the when you say, see, the availability, it's very clear that the Kerala model or the entrepreneurial, the high tech that you're referring to is nothing but in some sense reflected in the larger national discourse of India having engineering exports, high engineering exports. So in some sense, Kerala, manufacturing Kerala seems to be following that. So how has been given that there is a huge migration from Kerala, how difficult has been the availability of human capital for manufacturing per se? So like, was human capital easily available for across all kinds of departments, or you had to really look out for people? So how did you tackle that? And how do you also see how can these MSMEs utilize the opportunity that GST has given it to increase the interstate trade? So these are probably two questions probably I had with respect to the presentations. So are there any further questions for this round? Then probably can I request the panelists to start off? So can we start with Professor Harilal first, then Professor Balagopal, and then Professor Tomy Mathew?
Yeah, I'll try to address Professor Mani's question. I know he's quite right. In fact, now we should be focusing on intra-India trade, our trade with the rest of India. Unfortunately, we don't have proper database on intra trade compared to trade with rest of the world. But now we used to have certain periodic surveys, and using that in serious, we made some studies earlier. Dr. Isaac had done a study at least 2 decades back. And at that point of time itself, it was very clear that Kerala was running a huge trade deficit with the rest of India and rest of the world as far as goods are concerned. We get remittances, we export human resources, get remittances, and the trade deficit is paid by the remittances. That's what is happening. Now, therefore, it's very important that we try to make certain products that we import. But the problem is, in the case of many products that we import, the labor, the wage advantage we may not have. The price advantage in terms of price of non-tradables we may not have. So we will have to work in a disease environment where the non-tradable prices are very high. Land prices are prohibitive for industries to be located in India, in Kerala. Similarly, rents are high, wages are high, other non-tradable prices are high. Therefore, we have to be selective. But it will be a very useful work if we can get down to this data on Kerala's exports and imports, not only with the rest of the world, but rest of India, and then see what is really happening. And what are the areas where we can have small industries as well as other investment in spite of the disease environment. And that can be in fair trade, that can be in many other areas where, in fact, it needs some careful planning, careful thought, etc. But there is another method about which Sri Balagopal was hinting. See, entrepreneurs, they have an assessment of the situation. They know what will be profitable here. I mean, entrepreneurs who are not promoted too much by the state, the entrepreneurs who make their own decisions. And in Kerala, many of the successful entrepreneurs came because they found the possibility of in certain sectors. So we should probably learn from their experience and try to identify areas where we have the advantage. Some of the disadvantages which may be apparent, but as Tomy Mathew was saying, explaining, that should be taken as advantage. In fact, there are many things where we can convert the apparent disadvantage into a major advantage. And Professor Mani has already taken initiative to undertake some such studies. And I think we should, in the coming year, we should follow it up, and we should be able to give some useful policy advice to the government.
Yeah, Sribal Gopal, can you respond, please?
Yeah, I would just first also like to just respond to the same point by Professor Mani, which Professor Harilal just now responded about this. I think it's a very good point. Whenever we think of exports, we are always thinking about external sector, but we don't see about Kerala within the framework of a much larger country, with just 1% of the land area and 2.5% of the population, and with the enormous purchasing power because of the higher per capita consumption expenditure. Here, these are things which we should leverage, and in fact, we should look on, we are very fortunate in having a country like India as our hinterland, in the sense to look. But somehow, whenever we think of export, we are thinking about other countries. So I think this is something which calls for certain specific actions. We have not really invested either as a government or even as business associations in really getting to know what are the needs of major markets within the country, like the Bombay region or the National Capital region or Tamil Nadu. For example, just looking at this in terms of when Professor Sushil Khanna was talking about that, adverse trade balance with just the neighboring states itself, he came up with a figure like something like 1 lakh crores was the deficit with the neighboring states, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, most of it with Tamil Nadu, but also Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana. Now, I thought instead of looking on that as a very big problem, we should look on it as a very big opportunity. Why not for instance, some businesses here already, like I think if you take V-Guard has its design engineers and design team and quality assurance, and their top people are all located in Cochin. Their factories are in Coimbatore. Now, why can't we have such a complementarity of where if we are able to focus and develop our industrial design skills, industrial testing, industrial R&D, and focus on those areas and provide those skills to the neighboring Tamil Nadu. In fact, these two economies are very complementary in nature. And while one is very strong on commodity producing sectors, and we are here very rich in human resources and skills, etc. So, is there some way we are just leaving this to things to happen spontaneously? I think this policy should get involved here and try and see whether we can reach out to Tamil Nadu. And there are also people, if it's a win-win situation, I'm sure they will look at it. So that's one. Then the external sector, I would say, vis-a-vis the rest of the country, is a tremendous business opportunity and where we should really look at it. And I was actually staggered to hear this figure. I didn't realize it was that small that our external trade figure is only 2% of GSDP and the rest of it is with the rest of India. I was not aware of that figure, and that has really given me, my head is really buzzing now with, after this seminar, I really want to sit down and read more about that. That's one. The other thing is, for example, one of the things which should be done, I think here is, we should see, since our value add, I mean, all our high-tech modern manufacturing sector, almost all the materials and components are sourced from outside, and the finished products also go outside. So in other words, logistics and inventories become a very important part of the business costs and business tasks of MSMEs. Now, for MSMEs, MSMEs cannot afford large warehouses and cannot carry inventories. So here is where, if the government can create, instead of just like we do for IT parks and all that, it's not just provide the land. If you can provide the land and get either private sector players or public sector players to come in and set up refrigerated warehouses, specialized warehouses, and some bonded warehouses, things like anything which can reduce the cost of operations and transaction costs of MSMEs, I think these are the ways we should really start working. For example, in terms of productivity. So ultimately, the manufacturing efficiency comes down to factor productivity and not just the nominal factor cost. So if our transportation facilities are more efficient, we have 4 international airports. Now, people used to joke about it, saying, what's the big deal, 4 international airports? I remember reading recently somewhere that Singapore has set up and has constructed an airport just for the aircraft maintenance business. And Rolls-Royce has relocated its aircraft design and aircraft engine design and some overhauling facility to Singapore. So I'm saying, if these maintenance and aircraft maintenance organizations, regular aircraft overhauls, we are on a major route. So it is, we got a very good location. So I think we should be able to make many of what appear to be non-tradables, we could make them into, like for instance, healthcare and our hospital setup here. Why not build the healthcare tourism sector, so that, see, already people from various parts of India come here and the world come here for Ayurveda. Now, if you really build on that, we don't even have to look at the external sector. From upcountry, from North India itself, we will have all our Ayurveda places will be fully booked into perpetuity, if you look at it, and much more will have to be created. So these are ways in which this present adverse balance of trade which we have with the rest of the country can be redressed to some extent by building up businesses like this.
Shri Tomy, Mathew, can you respond, please?
I know that at what's the time? 1:17, I am the only thing that's standing between you and your lunch. So I'll restrict myself to, the specifics that have come to me. First, on this whole issue of, what has been highlighted, that Kerala produces for the distant market, and or whatever we produce, we commit to the distant markets, and whatever we consume, we bring from elsewhere. I think it's good to, look at that, particularly in the context of food, in terms of the new environmental concerns that are being raised. Food miles is now a veritable concern. And this massive haulage of commodities across not just continents, but across this subcontinent itself will have to be looked at very seriously. So I am a little concerned about the fact that, our food consumption, not to suggest that we will become self-sufficient in our food production, but every bit of substitution there with local production has a huge trade-off in terms of its carbon footprint and its environmental consequences. So I think in the carbon neutral world that we all aspire to in the near distant future, I think the idea of food miles will come in, and in that the type of localization of food that is that should be a process, should not be lost sight of. I'll get to the specific questions that were asked to me, particularly in terms of, international trade being a very minuscule portion of our, of our trade earnings, as it were, whereas interstate trade being an extremely significant one. I've been asked this question so very often. What is the number of middle class in India now? It's about 300 million. But that's the size of the whole population of continental Europe. So if I go and peddle my cashews in Europe, saying, look, fairly produced in Kerala, therefore please pay us a fair price. What about these middle class in India who should be asked to pay their dues to the rural, producers in the country? Therefore, I think in committing our products, and even more importantly, in sourcing our products from the rest of India, if we could usher in fair trade principles, we are going to go a long way. And one particular area there where we could really start with is public procurement. Public procurement, as in, procurement by our health services, procurement by a host of, our governmental and, semi-governmental institutions. If those procurements that come from the rest of the country can be anchored on fairer or more just trade terms, I think we will make a huge beginning, and that will have definitely impact and ripple effects on our exports or on our trade with the rest of the country as well. On the specific questions on how we went about fair trade, I really need to say we used a combination of all that you mentioned, Dr. Chidambaran. Yes, we were labeled fair trade as well, as it fair trade certified. But more than anything, we quickly realized that that's not where we will place ourselves in. Do not forget, there's not just fair trade, there's also fair washing. So don't forget that Kit Kat was fair trade certified. Do not forget that Nescafe was fair trade certified. Of course, they dumped it in double quick time when the going got tough. Cadbury's was fair trade certified. So there is fair trade and fair trade. And in that whole ambit, as in organic where there is greenwashing, in fair trade there is fair washing as well. So the tricky waters out there, I think it's very important to see where you anchor yourself. What we have done is to make sure that our trade is predominantly with what we call the ATOs, or the alternate trade organizations. These are organizations that have been set up and created primarily as trade justice ventures. An iconic company like Cafe Direct, for instance, began when activists from the UK traveled to Nicaragua, taught in the adult literacy classes in the evenings, and plucked coffee in the coffee plantations during the daytime. And when they returned back, they brought with them a box of coffee, ground very badly, and then sold in the soldati markets or in the world shops in the UK. Or those who imported those, against the Cuban embargo, those who imported those, discolored sugar and tried to say, forget the color, but it's really healthy sugar. Can you start buying because Cuba is in trouble? So the political component of fair trade is extremely important. Fair trade is also a trade label which, you can, for instance, sell 1,000 metric tons of coffee and then trade 10 tons in fair trade coffee, but also claim that you're in fair trade. So I think that's an important area, and precisely why, governmental policies that create fair trade, regulations. For instance, the Veneto region of Italy has a fair trade legislation now. There are other regions in Canada that are attempting that. These are where this fair washing component of fair trade is being attempted to be dealt with. And I think a place like Kerala or, the Kerala model definitely has, contributions to make in that global dialogue on trade justice. And I think we have stayed away from that. I'll end by just one more point. We talked of, in the context of what Professor Harilal mentioned in terms of the import, depending on various trade treaties that we have landed ourselves in. How about fair trade, he asked, in our import of goods from those countries? I want to suggest that Kerala make a beginning there. Our cashew industry depends heavily on imports from Africa. And believe you me, they are blood cashews. They are sourced by paying a pittance to the cashew producers in Africa. There is a paper lying, gathering dust somewhere in Cashew Development Corporation offices, reached there through the Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan, that talked of fair trading practices of our import of cashew from Africa, our processing it in cashew factories in Kerala, which recognize and respect trade union and labor rights, and are committing it to the global marketplace on fair trade terms. I think we need to lift that up and maybe make a beginning from that stage. After all, Cashew Development Corporation and all those industries, the cashew councils, are all embedded within the Kerala industry department. I think if we make that beginning, it would really give us pointers to how we widen and increase the water flow in this global tiny, what is now a tiny stream of trade justice against a vast ocean of iniquitous international commerce. Thank you.
Thank you, Shri Tomy, Mathew. So I think we just have just 5 more minutes. If anybody has for a second round of questions, the floor is open. Anybody has any comment or question, he or she may write in the chat box or raise your hand.
Can I just intervene? Chidambaran, this is Veena.
Yes, Dr. Veena, please go ahead.
Based on the discussion, one question I just wanted to find out from Balagopal is that whether it was very interesting. So I just wanted to find out whether he has come across any women entrepreneur who have some interest in getting into these technology intensive sectors. We do find that a lot of tailoring and garment related entrepreneurs have come up. I did see that. But then when it comes to the technology, since he is looking at more into the detailed kind of sample based research, whether he has come up with such things. Apart from that, major one intervention I wanted to find out from Professor Sunil Mani has mentioned that our export is only some 2 or 3% to GSDP, where I just wanted to find out what is the source of that data, that how do they really calculate that exports. Because based on my study, which was published in Sunil Mani's book, where we tried to gather Kerala's exports from DGCIS, the trade data, which we get it for each state. And we tried to look at the share, and we found that it was almost 5% as on 2002 to 2000 till 2008. After we got this Cochin Special Economic Zone, that share has increased to even up to 25%. So maybe this share, this export also includes of yellow metal, gold. But I just wanted to find out, this is the kind of figure I have. And when it comes to Kerala's exports to India's exports, share of Kerala's share to India's export share, you calculate, compare, it is coming only 3%. So the importance, if you look at the exports in terms of Kerala's GSDP, a lot of significance. It has got some significance. But when it comes to Kerala's exports to India's exports, may not be all that important in that way. So I just wanted to clarify on that part. Thank you.
Should I respond?
Yeah, please.
This is regarding Dr. Beena's question regarding women entrepreneurs. Yes, I have come across very intrepid women entrepreneurs who run technology enterprises employing hundreds of people. Not many, but they're doing it with distinction. They have been doing it for a sufficient number. And some of them are one or two of them are well known. The others are not so well known. They run what one would imagine very tough areas like electrical engineering contract work at sites of factories and power stations and all that. I've come across one person who runs an engineering enterprise based out of Cochin and similar such things. But one thing is, if you go by the membership of industry associations and bodies which is where one gets to meet others, it's conspicuous by the almost total absence of women, which is a matter of concern actually, because in my own experience in terms of professional competence and capability to run organizations and to do what were not very traditional jobs which were assigned to women, my experience has been that whenever I had the good sense to appoint a woman to manager to handle a responsible position like that, the results always exceeded my expectations and they produced great work. So I think this is an area where, I would be surprised. In fact, it is surprising to me why the situation like this in Kerala, which has produced the first judges and the first engineers and the first doctors and all that in so many fields, why can't we produce more entrepreneurs? I'm unable to understand.
Chidambaran, I'll make a remark related to Beena's question. Of course, Professor Mani may also want to add. I forgot to mention about Beena's study. In fact, we need to put together GST data and other data sources on intra-regional trade. Then only we can have a more reliable figure. In fact, this 1 trillion trade deficit, which is given by Sushil Ghana, need to be examined in that context. We need to, it's true that we are having a very huge trade deficit with the rest of the world and rest of India as far as goods are concerned. But the orders of magnitude we'll have to check further, and we'll have to take up a little more research on this.
Okay, may I answer Beena's point?
Professor Mani, yes, please.
Yeah, I see. My data is it's not my own data. It is basically, I quoted Sushil Khanna. We had made a presentation in CDS about 2 years ago, and he has used the e-waybill data because that would give you a much more accurate picture of the trade that is taking place between Kerala and rest of the world and rest of India. So it's based on that that this figure is given, and one could even without that, one could understand certainly that the internal trade is much higher than external trade, for the simple reason that if you look at all the construction material that we are using in Kerala, they are all coming from rest of India and not from abroad. And then if you look at all the cars and motorcycles and two-wheelers that we are a large consumer of, is also from rest of India, not from abroad. And so we do have and then of course, many food items are also sourced from rest of India. So that trade is certainly likely to be higher than external trade.
Thank you, Professor Mani. I think we are just near just 3 minutes from over closing time. So if nobody has any other questions or comments to us, I think we can wind up. And I would first of all like to, I think all of us would agree that it has been a very enriching session on and enriching panel discussion on trade. We have hugely benefited from the expert practitioners perspective of Sri Tomy Mathew and Sri Balagopal. It's been pleasure hearing both of them, and also Professor Harilaj's expert academic as well as policy view. Multiplied, as we say, actually multiplied the the experience and the takeaway points that we got from this session. What comes out clearly is that it is possible to incorporate the Kerala model into the both agricultural sector as well as the manufacturing sector, and probably strong interlinkages of the industry, the agriculturist as well as policies. There is a way that can be found out that can integrate and show the way forward for the whole Kerala economy and to increase its trade not only with the external world but also within India. So I want to thank all of our panelists for taking time out and giving us such expert views on this this very wide topic. I also want to thank all the participants in the discussion. Thank you very much. We will end this session now. The next session of the conference will be at 2:30. I request all of you to join at 2:30. Thank you so much and have a nice lunch.